I'm Megan, and this is Ghost and Toast Makeup Sundays. So, all of you are new here. I'm new here, so let's talk about this for a second. So what Ghost and Toast Makeup Sundays is every Sunday, I'm gonna sit down, do my makeup, get ready, whatever, grab some stuff to toast with, and talk about true life ghost stories. So if you like ghosts and paranormal activities, alcohol, and makeup, then I highly suggest you subscribe because I'm here for you every Sunday. So let's get started. So today we have a good story for you for the very first Ghost and Toast Makeup Sundays. Let's see. So I am from Northwest Missouri, and there is a very well-known story just a little bit north from here in a tiny town called Villisca, Iowa. And what we're going to talk about today is the Villisca Murderer Axe House. First, we're going to go back in time and we're going to talk a little bit about the town, okay? So Villisca, Iowa, and I'll include pictures and snapshots in the description as well, so you can kind of check this out for yourself. So Villisca, Iowa is a small town about 45 minutes just north of the Missouri border. Obviously the town is called Villisca. Now let's see. So in the early 1900s, Villisca, Iowa was a Midwestern town of about 2,500 people. And this town was flourishing. And I mean, businesses lined the streets, and there was a train station, and trains were constantly pulling in to this town for trade, and they were bringing tourists and new people into the town. They employed a lot of railroad workers because they were expanding their railroad system. So that was like a big thing that people looked at Villisca, you know, that's kind of like what they associated with Villisca for a while. Everybody knows everybody. Something happens, everybody knows about it within like 2 hours. So, you know, people talk. And all of these accomplishments that this city had made up to this point completely vanishes after this incident, I guess I should say. And before we get on that, I'm gonna take a little drink. All right. Oh, I probably should do my makeup too, shouldn't I? So, June 10th, 1912 is the date all of this went down. A long time before, you know, serial killers and mass murderers are a thing, you just didn't hear about that. Like, that just wasn't something that you heard about in the news back in the early 1900s. I know that there were, like, things were going on, but a lot of them went kind of under the radar, unnoticed or, like, untalked about. If somebody was killed, it wasn't, like, easy to find out who did it or why or, like, what, you know, killed them. Like, if it was poison, for example. Like, they didn't have that, like, DNA testing or, like, the ability to figure that out at this point. So it just, like, wasn't talked about. And the, like, investigations were pretty low-key. So, like, this was a big deal, and especially in this small town. So, Lena and Ina Stillinger, the daughters of Joseph and Sarah Stillinger, left their home for church early Sunday morning. And so these two girls were gonna go to church and then hang out with their grandma and then do, you know, more activities that the town was putting on, and they were gonna, you know, go home. They were invited by Catherine Moore to spend the night at the Moore home instead. And so the Children's Day program at the church, it was an annual event, and it began at approximately 8 p.m. on Sunday evening, June 9th. According to witnesses, Sarah Moore, the wife of J.B. Moore, coordinated the exercise. So she was in charge of planning this whole thing. All of the Moore children, as well as the Stillinger girls, participated in the exercises. Josiah Moore, one of the kids from JB and Sarah, sat in the congregation. The program ended at 9:30 p.m. and the Moore family, along with the Stillinger sisters, walked home from the church. They entered the Moore home sometime between 9:45 and 10 p.m. So this was pretty late at night. The following morning, at approximately 5 a.m., Mary Peckham, the Moore's next door neighbor, stepped into her yard to hang laundry. At approximately 7 a.m., she realized that not only had the Moores not been outside, nor the chores begun, but that the house itself seemed unusually still. And, you know, back in the early 1900s, getting up at 5 a.m. and having the kids start the chores, doing laundry, cleaning dishes, feeding the chickens or the goats or whatever, like, that's common. That's, you know, something common that families would do, because they got up and they did all this stuff to get ready and, like, take care of their home and their livestock or whatever, and then they would get ready for the day and then they would go to work. So, like, JB, for example, like, he would get up and, like, start the chores and, like, help with them or, like, coordinate them, you know, because he's, like, the dad, so he is the man of the house. He, like, runs everything. Most families would all sit down for breakfast in the morning before, like, dispersing to go to work or whatnot. So at 7:30, it's kind of, like, weird that nothing's, like, going on in the house, like, nothing has been started. And, you know, I guess, especially for a family that has multiple children like that, like, the kids would be, like, out doing stuff because they had to. And so, like, that was just kind of weird, you know? Between 7 and 8 a.m., Mary Peckham, the neighbor, approached the house and knocked on the door. When she received no response, she attempted to open the door, only to find it locked from the inside. Let the chickens out. She let the Moore's chickens out because they hadn't been out yet. They haven't been fed. Mary, the neighbor, placed a call to Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. So he was an older brother. He was out of the house already. He didn't live there with them. And after placing this call, unknowingly kind of set the pace for one of the most mismanaged murder investigations to ever be undertaken. So, based on the testimonies of Mary Peckham and those who saw the Moores at the Children's Day exercise, it is believed that sometime between midnight and 5 a.m., an unknown assailant entered the home of J.B. Moore and brutally murdered all occupants of the house with an axe. Upon arriving at the home of his family, Ross Moore attempted to look in the bedroom window and knocked on their door and shouted, like, attempting to wake somebody inside the house. But yeah, so, like, after, he looked in the window and knocked, he then produced his keys and found one that opened the door. So he had like multiple keys for like the shed and like the chicken coop and stuff like that. Although the neighbor, Mary Peckham, followed him onto the porch, she did not enter the parlor, and that was probably for the best, because what he found was just awful. Ross went no farther than the room of the parlor. Oh, off of the parlor, I'm sorry. When he opened the bedroom door, he saw 2 bodies on the bed and dark stains on the bedclothes. He returned immediately to the porch and told Mary, the neighbor, to call the sheriff. The 2 bodies in the room downstairs were Lena Stillinger, age 12, and her sister Ina, age 8, house guest of the Moore children. So yes, the 2 bodies in the room were Lena and Ina. The remaining members of the Moore family were found in the upstairs bedroom by City Marshal Hank Horton, who arrived shortly after being called. Every person in the house had been brutally murdered, their skulls crushed as they slept. Josiah Moore, age 43, Sarah Montgomery Moore, age 39, so that's JB and Sarah, the owners of the house, and the parents. Herman Moore, age 11, Catherine Moore, age 9, who was friends with those 2 girls, Boyd Moore, age 7, and Paul Moore, age 5, as well as the Stillinger sisters. Once the murders were discovered, the news traveled quickly in the town, as what happens in small towns. Neighbors and curious onlookers converged on the house. So, you know, people are curious. They want to like see dead bodies, I guess. I don't know. That's kind of weird, but law enforcement quickly had lost control of the crime scene due to this convergence of people onto the house. They were, you know, trying to go in the house and look and tampering with the crime scene. And it is said that up to 100 people walked through this house gawking at the bodies before the Villisca National Guard finally arrived to remove the bodies and control the crowds. So the National Guard finally arrives. They, you know, tape off the area and secure the home. And the only known facts regarding the scene of the crime were that 8 people had been bludgeoned to death, presumably with an axe left at the crime scene. It appeared all had been asleep at the time of the murders. Doctors estimated the time of death somewhere shortly after midnight. Curtains were drawn on all of the windows in the house except 2, which didn't have curtains at all. These windows were covered with clothing belonging to the Moores, so somebody went out of their way to cover up these windows with clothing or something so nobody can look in and see. All of the victims... Okay, so this also is kind of weird too. All of the victims' faces were covered with bedclothes after they were killed. A kerosene lamp was found at the foot of the bed of Josiah and Sarah. So, Josiah is JB, so JB and Sarah. The chimney was off and the wick had been turned back. The chimney was found under the dresser. A similar lamp was found at the foot of the bed of the Stillinger girls. The chimney was also off. The axe that was used for the murders was found in the room occupied by the Stillinger girls. It was bloody, but an attempt had been made to wipe it off. The axe belonged to J.V. Moore, so the axe used to kill everybody with belonged to the family. The ceilings in the parents' bedrooms and the children's rooms showed gouge marks, apparently made by the upswing of the axe, which made law officials believe that it was a man. Also, like, the force of the axe, like, coming down also made law officials believe that it was a man who committed the crime. A piece of a keychain was found on the floor in the downstairs bedroom. Also, a pan of bloody water was discovered on the kitchen table, as well as a plate of uneaten food. So that was strange. All the doors were locked from the inside. The bodies of Lena and Ina Stillinger were found in the downstairs bedroom off of the parlor. Ina was sleeping closest to the wall with Lena on her right side. A gray coat covered her face. Lena, according to the inquest testimony of Dr. F.S. Williams, lay as though she had kicked one foot out of her bed sideways, with one hand under the pillow on her right side, half sideways, not clear over, but just a little. So apparently she had been struck in the head and squirmed down the bed. Perhaps, like, you know, to, like, get away. So she had, like, squirmed down the bed about, like, 1/3 of the way down. Also, her nightgown was slit up and she was wearing no undergarments. There was a blood stain on the inside of her right knee, and what the doctors assume was a defensive wound on her arm. Of all of the victims, it looks like Lena did not die on the first hit. It looked like she kind of tried to fight back or, like, get away. It's unclear if the reason why she had no undergarments on was because she was, like, sexually assaulted. Like, that's not known at this point. Lindquist also made note of one of Sarah's shoes, which he found on Josiah's side of the bed. The shoe was found on its side, however, it had blood inside as well as under it. It was Lindquist's assumption that the shoe had been upright when Josiah was first struck, and the blood ran off of the bed into the shoe. He believed the killer later returned to the bed to inflict additional blows and subsequently knocked the shoe over. So he struck him, I think, went and struck Sarah, and then came back and struck JB some more, which then he knocked over the shoe. Had the murders been committed today, it is almost certain that law enforcement officials would have easily solved the crime and brought the murderer to justice. Although it's almost 100 years later, and the Villisca Axe murders remain a mystery. They remain unsolved. Nobody knows who did it. Nobody has any leads. So whoever committed this terrible crime got off free. Like, he never got caught, which is scary. Like, he just killed 8 people with an axe and was doing all kinds of weird shit, and is still walking around. I mean, obviously he's dead now, but like, at the time, you know, like, that's terrifying to think of, especially if you live in that town, because you don't know who it is. It's, you know, in hindsight, it's definitely easy to blame, like, law enforcement officials at the time, because they definitely, like, did not handle the situation very well. They let people in that should not have been in, but, you know, it's 1912, like, fingerprinting was just barely started, and DNA testing was not even, like, a thing. So, you know, I guess you can't, like, fault them too much, I suppose. It is open to the public for tours, but, I mean, it's just, like, awful. Like, the situation is awful. In 1994, Darwin and Martha Lynn of Corning, Iowa, purchased the former home of J.B. Moore and his family. The house was returned to its original condition at the time of the murders on June 10th, 1912. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it was open for tours. Films and books of the murders have recently captured the interest of an audience who had never heard of the horrendous crimes. Psychics claim that they've identified the murderer, and history buffs continue collecting piles of documents they say point to the truth. But, I mean, in all honesty, like, we don't know. Like, we'll never know. There were many who believe that Frank F. Jones, a prominent Villisca resident and Iowa state senator, was responsible for the brutal deaths of the Moores and the Stillinger girls. Others adamantly insist that the crazed Reverend George Kelly was the culprit. Still, others believe that the Moore murders were the work of someone totally unrelated to the town of Villisca, like a possible traveler or a hobo or a serial killer. J.B. Moore worked for Frank Jones at the Jones store for several years until he opened his own implement company in 1908. So, according to Villisca residents, Jones was extremely upset that Moore had left the company and left him to open up his own company and kind of like compete with him. So, you know, this guy kind of thought that JB was essentially stealing all of his business from him when he did open his own company, and that he was taking the franchise away from him. So that's why he was upset. Rumor was that Moore had an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law as well, and her name was Donna. So that like further fanned the flames. Detective Wilkerson of the Burns Detective Agency openly accused Frank and his son Albert of hiring Williams Mansfield to kill Joe Moore. Neither Jones was ever arrested, and both denied any connection to the murders. So William Blackie Mansfield was arrested in 1916. William Mansfield of Blue Island, Illinois, was the prime suspect of the Burns Detective Agency of Kansas City and Detective James Newton Wilkerson. According to the Wilkerson investigation, the murder of Joe Moore and the other occupants of the Moore home were committed by Mansfield, who in turn, hired by F.F. Jones. Mansfield was also known as George Worley and or Jack Turnbaugh. According to Wilkerson, Mansfield was a cocaine fiend and a serial killer. Wilkerson also believed that Mansfield was responsible for the axe murders of his wife, infant child, father-in-law, and mother-in-law in Blue Island, Illinois on July 5th, 1914, 2 years after the Villisca axe murders. The axe murders committed in Paola, Kansas, 4 days before Villisca murders, and the murders of Jenny Peterson and Jenny Miller in Aurora, Colorado. So this guy, was believed to kill quite a few people in the same type of way. So it kind of makes sense. According to Wilkerson's investigation, all of the murders were committed in precisely the same manner, indicating the same man committed them. Wilkerson stated that he could prove that Mansfield was present in each of these places on the night of the murders. In each murder, the victims were hacked to death with an axe, and the mirrors of the home were covered. A burning lamp with the chimney off was left at the foot of the bed, and a basin in which the murderer washed was found in the kitchen. In each case, the murderer avoided leaving fingerprints by wearing gloves, which Wilkerson believed was strong evidence that the man was Mansfield, who knew his fingerprints were on file at the federal military prison at Leavenworth. So, sounds pretty close, if I do say so myself. I definitely believe, just from my own research and my own opinion, I do believe that this Mansfield character is the one that killed the family. And I'm not positive about the senator though, hiring him. I can definitely see it. It makes a lot of sense, but it's just kind of hard to tell when it comes to that stuff. So I'm not sure if the senator, would do something like that. There's not a lot of information about it. It's just suspected. And nobody was arrested for this. The people were questioned, but they weren't arrested because law enforcement didn't have the evidence to arrest them. This was just like rumors going around. So it was just kind of like, I don't know. Like, what do you do? Like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Damned if you don't. Can't talk. So, I don't know. Like, what do you guys think? Do you think that the senator hired Mansfield to kill the family? Or do you think that this guy just killed them himself? So Wilkerson, the cop, managed to convince a grand jury to open an investigation in 1916, and Mansfield was arrested and brought to Montgomery County from Kansas City. Payroll records, however, provided an alibi that placed Mansfield in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. He was released for lack of evidence and later won a lawsuit he brought against Wilkerson and was awarded $2,225. Wilkerson believed that pressure from Jones resulted not only in Mansfield's release, but also in the subsequent arrest and trial of Reverend Kelly. The other prime suspect in the axe murders was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher. Kelly and his wife settled in Macedonia, Iowa in 1912 after several years of preaching throughout the Midwest. In 1917, Kelly was arrested and charged with the murder of one of the victims of the Villisca axe murders. Kelly was invited to attend the Children's Day exercises at the Presbyterian Church on June 9th of 1912. His presence in Villisca on the night of the murders and his subsequent departure in the early morning hours of June 10th made him a prime suspect in the case. Kelly's supposed confession made a mockery of law enforcement practices at the time and was withdrawn before his trial began. Kelly's first trial resulted in a hung jury, and was finally acquitted by the second. So there's another suspect. There existed a strong possibility that a serial killer was actually at work, and Wilkerson's case against Mansfield actually suggested the same. M.W. McClottery, a federal officer assigned to the Villisca case, actually announced in May of 1913 he had solved not only the Villisca murders, but 22 others that had been committed in the Midwest around the same time frame. McClottery's theory was that Henry Moore, no relation to Josiah Moore, was the serial killer responsible for all of the crimes. Henry Moore was actually convicted of the murders of his mother and maternal grandmother in Columbia, Missouri, just months after the murders in Villisca. Moore's family members were killed just as brutally as victims in Villisca, and his weapon was the choice of an axe. During the Villisca investigation, other axe murders also came to light. Just 9 months before the crime in Villisca, H.C. Wayne, his wife and child, and Mrs. A.J. Burnham and her 2 children were bludgeoned with an axe in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So this was the Colorado Springs murders that they had mentioned earlier. A month later, so after the murders in Colorado Springs, a month later in October of 1911, a family was killed in Mammoth, Illinois, and just a week later, 5 members of a family in Ellsworth, Kansas were murdered as well, as they slept. Just a week before the killing of the Moores and Stillingers in Villisca, a man and his wife were killed in Paola, Kansas. The similarities in the crimes were just striking. McClottery received information about Moore's conviction from his father, who was the warden of Leavenworth, Kansas Federal Penitentiary. It was his belief that Mr. Henry Moore had committed all of the murders. For whatever reason, McClottery's announcement was largely ignored, and to our knowledge, Henry Moore was not convicted of any of the other crimes. So the only crimes that he went down for was the murders of his mother and grandmother. And so, there's other suspects as well, but everything was pretty much just hearsay. And a lot of people do, kind of think that whoever did it, whether it was somebody who was hired to kill the family or whether it was a serial killer or like a hobo or a traveler passing through, they all believe that he had gotten in the house earlier that day, and you know, like when people, like when they weren't home, or that one of the children left a door unlocked or something like that, and he got in, and that he hid in the attic. And upon like further investigation, police found a little setup up in the attic where they believed that this murderer like stayed until he came down from the attic to commit the crimes. So the property after the murders have had 7 owners. It wasn't until 1994 that it was open to the public. The current owners, the Lynns, owned and operated the Olson Lynn Museum, located on the town square in downtown Villisca as well. So yeah, I mean, like, it quickly attracted rumors of being haunted because of its past, and the house was lived in for, you know, many years after the murder until it was bought by the Lynns and made into like a museum. Families never stayed for long though, and that's, you know, I said previously that it had about 7 owners. That's because people didn't stay there. They didn't want to stay there. It freaked them out. So there's, you know, every type of ghostly phenomena has been reported at this house that you can like imagine. So disembodied footsteps have been heard running up and down the stairs, things moving, people hear voices, people see apparitions, they see shadows out of the corner of their eyes, they get like bad vibes from certain spots in the house, such as the attic. So, I mean, everything that you can think of, the axe murder house has probably, you know, somebody has probably experienced it. It's been on basically every ghost hunting show, from Ghost Adventures to the scariest places on earth. And you can stay overnight and do your own type of ghost hunt. And people, you know, take EVP devices, they take like electromagnetic field devices, they take recorders, all kinds of stuff. They have, like, in the house, they have displays set up of what the house would have looked like back in 1912 and what the girls' rooms would have looked like, or what JV and Sarah's room would have looked like. They have pictures from, you know, like actual family pictures. Like, they also have a bulletin board full of pictures of paranormal evidence that people have taken while they have been touring the house. So there was a lot of nighttime pictures. There is a lot of nighttime pictures with ghostly orbs, and there's even a snapshot of somebody who had their back like scratched, supposedly by an unseen entity. People believe that there's an ominous presence up in the attic. You know, people get bad vibes up there. They feel like they're being watched. Just don't feel comfortable up there. People, like the tour guides that work there, you know, see things on a daily basis. They experience things moving. They experience footsteps downstairs while they're on a different level. They have toys set out that the kids would have played with. It is said that a toy car was sitting on the stove and it had been lying like on the other side of the stove, upside down. Well, okay, so I guess it was sitting upright, like it was sitting upright. It was just a toy car, just like sitting in the kitchen. And the tour guide had walked away and came back, and the car was on the stove upside down on its, like, you know, on the other side of the stove prior to where it was before. People have been said to hear voices of the little girls in the family. People see dark shadows on the stairs when they're downstairs in the parlor. People have seen shadows out of the corner of their eyes in the attic as well. There was an experience where a tour guide said that she was kind of watching someone's child, like, you know, people had come to see the house and tour the house, and they brought their child with them, and he was about 5 or 6, and they left him in the parlor with the tour guide, one of the tour guides, because he didn't want to go upstairs, and they didn't want to, you know, subject him to anything that would scare him, I guess. The tour guide said that as he was sitting there in the parlor, he was talking to somebody and, like, playing by himself, but he was, like, talking to somebody, like an imaginary, you know, like an imaginary friend, and that's what she thought it was an imaginary friend. And turns out that when the family came back down to get him, and, you know, she didn't think anything of it, but when the family came back down to pick him up, they, like, walked into another room, and there was a picture of, I think Catherine and the Stillinger girls, and the little boy pointed at one of the girls and said that he, you know, that he made a new friend, and, like, the mom was like, oh, you know, like, who's your imaginary friends? Like, I'm glad you're having fun. And he pointed at a picture of one of the girls and said, that's her. And so it, like, freaked everybody out. So this little boy was playing with one of the spirits of one of the victims of the little girls. And everybody just kind of, like, freaked out. So that was interesting, to say the least. It has been recorded on live footage of paranormal investigators catching, you know, toys, and specifically the balls, like, you know, like the rubber balls, like, moving. They'll toss the ball and say, okay, like, it's time to play, like, play catch with me, toss it back, and the ball will come back to them. It's been caught multiple times. Paranormal investigators have caught voices, disembodied voices that were unexplained, of little girls, of a little boy, of a man and a woman. Things happen all the time at this place, I guess, and it's pretty, like, intense. It is one of the most haunted places, I'd say, probably in the country, just based on the trauma that they experience there, and the, like, residual energy of the property. There's 2 different kinds of paranormal activity. There's residual hauntings, and then there's, like, intelligent hauntings. So residual hauntings are essentially, like, kind of like just, like, the energy of what has happened in the past is just still there, so it's just replaying, like, on a loop, because it's just energy. Or there's the intelligent hauntings, where they can answer you, they can physically, you know, move items, like throw balls, or, like, knock things off, or move a chair, or scratch you, and they can answer questions. And those are, like, the shadows that you see in response to a question, or that you hear a knock after you ask, can you do something for me? That's an intelligent type of haunting. And people have said that they've experienced both in this residence. They experienced the residual haunting, just the everyday activities that the Moore family did, and they also experienced the intelligent haunting. And some think that one of the family members, they don't know if it's the murderer. I definitely recommend looking at the documentary about the house and the murders, and also go ahead and I'll link the descriptions of everything down below, and then I suggest that you guys check out the different paranormal investigations that have happened at the house. And I feel like it's hard to express like how intense this is just talking about it. Like, you kind of have to like go there and experience it for yourself. It's a lot. I mean, this is a lot. It's really heavy. There's a lot of information just for one video. I probably could have done this in like 2 different parts. But I mean, this is the very first video I've ever done, so don't hate me too much, okay? And if anyone has like any experiences at, you know, their own experiences at the Villisca Axe Murder House, or they know somebody who has visited or done an overnight stay, or maybe you've gone and done your own investigation. If you have any like anything you want to share, like definitely share it, because it's easy to just like write off somebody who is just talking about it. But for you to have your own personal experience with something like that is just huge. Let me do my eyelashes off camera and then we'll come back and finish this up. Okay, I'm back. So I just went ahead and did my eyelash. Let me get another drink here really quick. But it's just like really interesting. It's an interesting case, and if it was a serial killer, if next time I was thinking, I hope you guys have a great day. Don't kill anybody. Go hunt some ghosts. I'll be seeing you. Bye.